Under the pale silver light of the moon that stretched across the quiet Wyoming plains, 29-year-old cowboy Luke Barrett paced the creaking wooden floor of his small ranch house, his newborn son, Illy, wailing in his trembling arms, and though Luke had broken wild mustangs, survived dust storms, and lived through the tragic loss of his wife during childbirth just 3 weeks earlier, nothing had ever shaken him like the helpless, piercing cry of his tiny baby who refused to be soothed. Sweat dampened his collar, his rough hands shook as he tried rocking the child the way the midwife had taught him, but Illy's sobs only grew sharper, echoing in the lonely rooms like a reminder of everything Luke feared he couldn't be. He tried milkily pushed the bottle away, he tried pacingly screamed harder, he tried singing, though his voice cracked with exhaustion and grief, and when the clock struck midnight, then 1, then 2, the little farmhouse felt like it was collapsing under the weight of sleeplessness and sorrow. Over the thin walls of the adjacent property lived Mara Collins, a gentle 41-year-old widow whose husband, a kind carpenter, had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving her with quiet evenings, aching memories, and a heart that still yearned for someone to care for. She had heard the baby cries for nights, but this night the sound was different, raw, desperate, stretching through the cold like a plea. Wrapped in a knitted shawl, she stepped onto her porch, hesitated only a moment, and then walked through the frost-crusted grass toward Luke's door, raising her hand to knock softly, and when Luke opened it, red-eyed, half awake, the baby thrashing weakly against his chest, Mara met his gaze with a calmness he had forgotten existed and said in a voice warm enough to melt winter, "Let me hold him." Luke blinked, flustered, hesitant, feeling torn between pride and desperation, but his arms were trembling too hard to resist, so he handed the baby over as gently as he could. The moment Illy was in Mara's arms, her practiced hands lifted and supported him with the experience of a woman who had once held a baby of her own, one she had lost to fever when he was only 6 months old, a memory that stabbed her heart even now, yet gave her the deep instinct to soothe. She began humming a soft lullaby, one her mother had sung to her when storms rattled the old farmhouse she grew up in, and within minutes the baby's cries softened into hiccups, then into tiny coos, then into peaceful breaths. Luke stared, speechless, feeling tears burn his eyes, partly from relief, partly from shame that he couldn't do what she had done so easily. But Mara looked up at him with gentle understanding and said, "You're doing the best you can. No man can carry this alone." She asked permission to sit, and Luke nodded, clearing a chair beside the dying embers of the fireplace. Mara settled into it, rocking Illy with practiced, loving movements, while Luke dropped into the chair across from her, his shoulders sagging, his body finally unclenching from days of strain. The ticking of the clock filled the silence, the room warmed slowly, and for the first time since his wife's passing, the house felt less like a tomb of grief and more like a place where life could breathe again. Over the next hour, Mara taught him small things he never knew, how to burp a baby properly by supporting the chest, how to wrap the blanket snugly without suffocating him, how to sway gently instead of pacing frantically. Luke listened like a drowning man clinging to rope. She told him about her late husband, about the small woodworking shop they ran together, about the baby boy they buried on a quiet hillside under a cottonwood tree. Her voice caught once, but she kept speaking, and Luke realized she wasn't only helping him, she was pouring years of bottled up tenderness into someone who needed it. When Illy finally fell asleep fully, Mara whispered, "He's strong, just like his father," and Luke felt something in his chest crack open. He took the baby back carefully, holding him with a newfound steadiness, and Mara smiled, a soft, motherly smile Luke had never received in his adult life. Before leaving, she insisted on making him a warm drink, moving around the kitchen as if she had always belonged there, finding herbs, heating water, handing him a steaming mug that smelled of chamomile and honey. "You need rest," she said firmly, "and someone to check on you. I live right next door. Don't shut me out. Luke nodded, too tired to protest, too grateful to hide it. The next morning she returned with breakfast, fresh bread, eggs, and a jar of strawberry preserves she made herself. Luke opened the door with Illy strapped against his chest, the cowboy's face marked by hours of sleep he hadn't had in weeks. Mara stayed a little while, helping him bathe the baby, showing him how to test the water temperature on his wrist, and as days passed, she became a constant presence in the farmhouse, bringing soups when Luke forgot to eat, changing the baby when his hands shook too much, folding laundry, telling stories that made Illy giggle. The townsfolk talked, of course. Whispers in the general store about the handsome young widower and the older widow next door. But Luke didn't care. The only thing he cared about was that Mara brought peace into his storm, and Illy adored her. One evening, a brutal windstorm rolled over the plains, rattling windows and shaking the rafters, and when Illy began to cry from the noise, Luke found that he no longer panicked. He held the baby close, humming the lullaby Mara taught him. At that moment, Mara knocked and stepped inside, brushing snow from her shawl, asking, "Need help?" Luke shook his head and said softly, "Got it. You taught me well." Mara's eyes glistened with quiet pride. Over the following weeks, something tender and unexpected rooted itself between them. Not romance at first, but a shared grief, a shared purpose, a shared healing. Mara had lost a child. Luke had lost a wife. Illy had lost a mother. Together, they filled each other's empty spaces. One late afternoon, as golden sunlight spilled through the windows, Luke found Mara sitting on the porch swing, Illy asleep in her arms, both of them rocking gently to the rhythm of the wind. "You saved us," Luke said quietly, sitting beside her. She shook her head. "No, Luke, you saved me too." He looked at her, really looked at her. The soft wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, the warmth in her smile, the strength in her weathered hands, and he felt a surge of emotion he hadn't expected. He placed his hand over hers, and when she didn't pull away, he knew she felt it too. Spring arrived early that year. Wildflowers dotted the fields, calves were born, and the ranch came alive with color again. One morning, Luke saddled his horse, lifting Illy into the sling Mara had sewn for him, and invited her to ride out with them to the hill overlooking the ranch. They rode slowly through the tall grass, and at the top of the hill, Luke stopped and looked at the horizon where sunlight painted everything gold. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, voice trembling slightly, "but I know I don't want to face it without you." Mara's breath caught, her eyes filling with tears, not of sorrow, but of a healing she once thought impossible. She reached out, cupping Luke's cheek gently, and whispered, "Then you won't." Illy babbled happily between them, reaching for both with tiny fingers, and the three of them looked out over the land. No longer broken souls surviving separately, but a new family forming quietly, beautifully, in the wide open heart of Wyoming.